London, England. 25th, it rained the day they met, of course. Not the dramatic kind, just the slow, constant drizzle that made the streets shimmer and umbrellas bloom like flowers. Harper was running late. Her tote bag soaked, her headphones tangled. She ducked into the first cafe she could find to dry off and order something hot enough to convince her day hadn't unraveled completely. He was already sitting at her favorite corner table. Rowan reading a dog-eared copy of Wuthering Heights, wearing a scarf that looked like it had a history. He glanced up and offered a half smile. She apologized for interrupting. He said the table belonged to the rain today. They talked not much, just enough to feel the current shift. He asked her what she did. She said she was a literature professor on sabbatical. He said he repaired clocks. Old things are quieter. He explained, more honest. That should have been the end of it. But the next Tuesday, she returned. So did he. And then again, it became a rhythm. They never planned it, it just happened. Like the rain or the way London always felt a little too full and a little too lonely. He wasn't loud, he wasn't smooth, he was slow and thoughtful, like a sentence you had to reread to understand. She found herself telling him things she hadn't said aloud in years about her brother's accident. The guilt she carried, the insomnia that still pulled at her ribs. He listened, not the way people do when they're waiting to talk, but the way people do when they want you to keep going. Rowan spoke less, but when he did, it mattered. He told her he lived with persistent depressive disorder, dysthymia, a quiet shadow that followed him everywhere. It's not dramatic, he said once, tracing the rim of his coffee mug. It's just always there, like background noise or fog. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached across the table and touched his hand. "I know that kind of weather," she said. They began meeting outside the cafe, museums, bookstores, hidden courtyards with ivy-covered walls on her birthday. He gave her a watch that didn't work because not everything that's broken has to be fixed. He told her, but love isn't always clean. It isn't always simple. There were days he vanished into himself, weeks when he wouldn't return her calls. She wrote letters instead, left them in his mailbox without expectation. When he reappeared, he never offered excuses, just a look, an apology carved from silence, and the promise of presence. They fell in love between pauses, between rainstorms, between the moments people usually rush through. One winter evening, as snow began to whisper over rooftops, he asked her to stay, not just for tea, not just for the night, but for all the days that felt like fog, all the ones that didn't. So she did. Now, years later, the same cafe still stands on the corner of Rose Lane. The same table waits in the window, though they visit it less often now. Their home is filled with clocks, none of them ticking. Her books line the walls. His blue scarf still hangs by the door. They still have bad days, but they've learned how to hold them together. Because sometimes love isn't thunder or lightning. Sometimes it's just the quiet that happens when someone chooses to sit beside you, even when it rains.
Reykjavik, Iceland, 2022. The wind never truly stops in Iceland. It hums through windows, whispers down alleyways, and reminds you always that you are small. Kala came for the quiet, for the long nights in the distance. She'd taken a leave from her teaching job in Boston after the panic attacks returned. Stronger this time, clawing at her chest during meetings, in grocery aisles, even mid-conversation. She found a rental flat above a candle shop. Her days were dim and deliberate. Tea, walks along the harbor, quiet reading in her oversized coat. She thought maybe, if she let the cold inside her match the cold outside, she'd finally feel balanced, but numbness wasn't healing. It was hiding. And then there was Emil. He sat beside her during a free walking tour, sketching the city's skyline while the guide droned on about Viking history. His notebook was full of half-finished things, buildings with no doors, skies without stars. He noticed her before she noticed him. "You look like someone who forgot how to land," he said without turning. She didn't reply, but she stayed beside him until the tour ended. They began meeting at the same cafe after that. Always 4 p.m., always the table in the back. He'd sketch, she'd write in her journal. Sometimes they talked, sometimes not. Emil was from Stockholm, but he'd been living in Reykjavik since spring. He told her eventually that he lived with bipolar 2, that drawing helped him when the highs got too sharp or the lows too deep. Sometimes he said, "I forget who I am until I put it on paper." Kala didn't flinch. She told him about her own mind, that it turned on her without warning, left her breathless, spiraling, unsure if the floor would stay beneath her. They shared the same language of stillness and storm. As the weeks passed, the bond deepened. He painted her once without asking, gave it to her on a Thursday when the wind howled loud enough to shake the windows. She stared at it for a long time. Her face looked stronger in his lines than she ever felt in her own skin. They weren't easy people to love. They needed space when others needed comfort. They shut down when the world leaned in. But somehow they made space for each other's silences. On her worst days, Emil would leave a small sketch outside her door. An open hand, a lighthouse, a bird mid-flight. On his darkest, she'd read aloud from her journal by candlelight, anchoring him back to the present word by word. Winter came hard. One night, Emil didn't show up. She waited an hour, 2. Finally, she found him near the cliffs, sitting in the snow, staring out to sea. "I wasn't going to jump," he said when she approached, "but I needed to feel something real." She didn't speak. She just sat beside him, her coat pressed against his, their breaths fogging into one. After that night, everything changed, slowly, cautiously. They let the word home mean something again. Now, years later, their apartment still sits above the candle shop, always smelling faintly of vanilla and ash. She teaches again, remotely from a sunlit room filled with his sketches. He paints, sells pieces to tourists who don't know the story behind them. They still have bad days, but they've built a rhythm, a life, a stillness inside the storm. Because some people don't rescue you. They sit in the snow beside you and remind you the wind can't howl forever. Eventually, even the sky comes back to blue.
New Orleans, Louisiana, August 2007. The air was heavy with heat and memory, and the streets still wore scars from the storm 2 years before. The city hadn't fully healed. Neither had Elise. She arrived in a rusted sedan, everything she owned packed in the back seat, a prescription bottle rattled in her glove box, bipolar 2 disorder, diagnosed late after years of mislabeling. The rage and sorrow is just bad days. She didn't come to New Orleans to find herself. She came because she was tired of being known. The French Quarter was too alive for her mood, but the Garden District had a slow ache she liked. She found a studio above a shuttered jazz club with peeling wallpaper and windows that moaned when it rained. She got a job as a server in a diner with cracked mugs and regulars who spoke in stories. That's where she met Jude. He was a dishwasher, 29, unshaven, quiet. When he smiled, it looked like he'd forgotten how he had the look of someone who'd been underwater too long, still wringing out his soul. PTSD, he said later, from a fire back home. Volunteer firefighter. He couldn't stand sirens now, couldn't sleep through thunderstorms. They were broken in opposite directions. She flew too high, burned too bright. He buried himself in silence. But pain recognizes pain, and they saw something familiar in each other, like a song you used to know by heart. Their love wasn't soft. It was fierce, volatile, desperate. They carved a world out of late-night walks and whispered fears. She painted again, chaotic, massive canvases with no clear center. He wrote songs on napkins, lyrics like wounds, like prayers. But love doesn't fix everything. Her mania returned in October. She didn't sleep for 5 days. She bought 3 stray dogs and named them after stars. Jude tried to ground her, but she clawed at him, screamed that he was just another anchor trying to drag her under. And he disappeared. Not forever, just long enough for her to shatter alone. She crashed hard, spent 2 nights in a psychiatric unit after collapsing at a gas station. When she got out, the dogs were gone. The studio was dark, but there was a note on her door. I didn't leave because you're sick. I left because I forgot how to breathe. But I'm still here. I just need to come back slowly. Let me. She waited, not because she was strong, but because she finally understood. He didn't owe her rescue, he owed her truth. Weeks passed. When he came back, he didn't bring flowers. He brought groceries, soap, a promise that he wasn't trying to save her, just stay with her through the storm. They built rules, shared meds, therapy appointments, a whiteboard for days they couldn't talk. They fought, they failed, but they didn't run now. 15 years later, they live above that same jazz club, which finally reopened. Her paintings hang in the gallery down the street. His music plays late into the night, soft, steady. The city still remembers the water, so do they. But they also remember who pulled them from it. 'Cause real love doesn't rescue. It remains even when the river forgets your name.